They first saw each other through rifle smoke. He was crouched behind a broken stone wall, uniform torn, breath ragged from running too long with too little sleep. She was across the narrow street, pressed into the shadow of a burned-out shop, blood streaking her sleeve where shrapnel had kissed her arm. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, two strangers wearing different colors, trained to see the other as an enemy. Then the shell hit nearby, and the world split open. He moved without thinking. Training said hold position. Instinct said move. He broke from cover, boots slapping mud, the air cracking around him. She tried to stand and couldn't. Her leg buckled, pain stealing the ground from under her. "Don't," she shouted, the word swallowed by thunder. The shot came sharp and final. He felt the impact like a hammer, spun and went down hard. The bullet tore through his shoulder, meant for her chest. He hit the ground beside her, gasping, the taste of iron flooding his mouth. For a moment, there was only the ringing. She dragged herself closer, hands shaking as she pressed cloth against his wound. "Why?" she demanded, voice breaking. "You don't even know me." He grimaced, a crooked smile cutting through the pain. "Didn't need to." They lay there as the street emptied itself of sound, the fight rolling away like a storm moving on. He slipped in and out, muttering names that weren't hers. She stayed. When footsteps returned, friendly to neither of them, she pulled him behind the wall, braced her body between him and the open street, and waited. By dusk, the city was quiet in that exhausted way only war knows. She half carried, half dragged him to a cellar she'd been using as a medic stop, neutral ground, if anything in war could be neutral. She cleaned the wound, bit back tears when he cried out, stitched him with hands steadier than she felt. "You'll live," she said finally. He exhaled, relief softening his face. "Good," he whispered. "Hate to be rude." They learned each other's names in fragments over the next days. Learned how laughter sounded when it surprised you. Learned how kindness could slip through the cracks of uniforms and orders. When patrols came close, she hid him. When her supplies ran thin, he watched the door, one good arm ready, refusing to rest until she did. They argued about nothing and everything, coffee's strength, whether the rain ever truly washed blood away, if home still existed as a place or only as a memory. "I'll be arrested if they find you," she said once, exhaustion sharpening her words. "I know," he replied. "I'll leave when I can walk." "You can't," she said. "Not yet." He met her gaze. "Then I stay." The war shifted lines again. It always did. One morning, orders crackled over the radio she'd scavenged. Evacuate. Her unit was moving. His was too toward each other. They stood in the cellar doorway, light slicing the dust between them. "If we meet out there," she said quietly, "we won't have a choice." He nodded. "Then don't meet me." They parted without promises, because promises were easy to break in a place that broke everything. Weeks later, amid another ruined square, gunfire flared. She dropped behind cover as bullets chewed stone. A figure ran across the open, too fast, too exposed. She shouted, lunged, and felt a body slam into hers, the force knocking the breath from her lungs. They rolled behind a truck as a round sparked where her head had been. She stared up into his face, stunned. "You said." "I know," he said, breathless, "but I saw you." He took another hit then, graze, shallow, but enough to remind them where they were. She tore a strip from her sleeve, tied it with teeth and hands in fury. "Idiot," she said, tears hot and sudden. "Probably," he answered, "still worth it." They survived that day, and the next, and the long, grinding days after when survival felt like defiance. When the war finally loosened its grip, it didn't give them a parade. It gave them silence, papers, long walks through streets relearning their names. They met again on a bridge neither side had managed to destroy. He wore no uniform, neither did she. "Opposite sides," she said, resting her elbows on the rail. He shook his head, smiling at the water moving on like it always had. "Opposite lines," he corrected, same place. She reached for his hand. This time no bullets answered. And in a world stitched back together by people who refused to stay enemies, they chose each other, not because of the war, but because even in the worst of it, they had learned what it meant to step into fire for someone you didn't know and walk out changed. They didn't rush what came next. Peace had a strange weight to it, heavy, uncertain, like a coat that didn't quite fit yet. They walked the bridge together and then off it, into a town relearning how to breathe. Shops reopened with broken windows still taped. Children played quietly at first, as if noise itself might bring the sky crashing down again. They found work where they could. She returned to what she knew, tending wounds that weren't made by bullets anymore. He fixed fences, hauled lumber, slept through the night for the first time in years and woke up startled by the silence. Some nights the past came back hard. He would jolt awake, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. She'd sit up instantly, already grounding him, her palm flat on his chest, counting his breaths until they slowed. Other nights it was her turn, eyes wide, staring at shadows that looked too much like doorways blown open. He'd light the small stove, make coffee too strong, and talk about nothing until morning softened the edges of the dark. "You still don't owe me anything," she said once, watching dawn climb the walls. "I know," he replied, "that's why I'm staying." Word traveled, as it always does in places stitched together after ruin. People whispered at first, about where they came from, what they had worn, who they used to answer to. Some looks were sharp, some doors stayed closed. Then a child fell from a wagon and broke his arm. She set it clean and straight. He carried the boy home, steady and gentle. The whispers shifted. A winter storm rolled in early that year. Roofs collapsed under snow. Roads vanished. He worked until his hands split, helping neighbors shore up barns and pull stranded families free. She turned their small house into a refuge, soups simmering, beds improvised, the injured sleeping safe and warm. One night, snow piled high against the door, cutting them off from the rest of the town. Candlelight flickered between them as the wind howled. "If things had gone differently," she said softly, "we might have met like this with guns raised." He looked at her for a long moment. "Or maybe we were always meant to meet this way," he said, "just took the long road." Spring came, stubborn and green. They planted a garden behind the house. He built the fence crooked on purpose so it wouldn't look too perfect. She laughed when the tomatoes grew wild and untamed. On the anniversary of the day he took the bullet, she found him standing at the edge of town, staring at nothing. "I still hear it sometimes," he admitted, "the shot." She stepped beside him. "I still feel the moment after," she said, "when I realized you were bleeding because of me." He turned to her. "No," he said gently, "because of a choice." He took her hand then, no urgency, no drama, just certainty. "I'd make it again." She squeezed his fingers, eyes bright. "So would I." Years later, when the town was whole enough to forget what it had been, people would tell the story differently. They'd say it was fate, or love at first sight, or that the war softened at the edges just long enough to let two people through. But the truth lived quieter than that. They were strangers on opposite sides who learned, inch by inch, scar by scar, that humanity didn't belong to any uniform. That sometimes the bravest act wasn't pulling a trigger, but stepping in front of one. And every morning they woke together in a world they helped choose. They proved that survival wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Time kept moving the way it always does, forward, indifferent. But they moved with it now instead of fighting the current. The house filled with small signs of life. A second chair by the door, extra boots drying by the stove, shelves lined with jars she labeled carefully, dates written in a neat hand. He added a window to the back room so morning light could reach the table where they ate. They never announced what they were to each other. The town decided on its own. When someone asked him one afternoon, "Is she your wife?" He paused, then answered honestly, "She's my home." That seemed to be enough. There were setbacks. Old loyalties didn't vanish just because the guns fell silent. Once, a man recognized her from before, from a time she wished could stay buried. His voice was loud, accusing. The street went still. Before she could speak, the rancher stepped forward, not angry, not threatening, just solid. "She saved lives here," he said, "including mine. That's all that matters." The man left, the silence broke, life resumed. That night she cried for the first time since the war ended, not from fear but from release. He didn't try to stop it, he just stayed. Seasons turned again. They took in a dog that followed him home one evening, ribs showing, tail wagging like hope itself. They fixed the roof of the old schoolhouse together. She taught children how to clean wounds and wash hands. He taught them how to mend wire and listen to the land. One summer evening, sitting on the porch with cicadas humming, she finally asked the question she'd carried for years. "Why me?" He thought about it. "Because you were there," he said, "and you didn't look away." She nodded, understanding. "Neither did you." When age began to slow him, she walked beside him instead of ahead. When grief brushed her shoulders again, memories resurfacing without warning, he knew how to hold space without trying to fix what didn't need fixing. They grew older in a way that felt earned. And long after the war became something people argued about in books instead of surviving in the dirt, children in that town would hear a quieter story, one their parents told without dates or sides. About a man who stepped into harm for someone he barely knew, about a woman who refused to become what the world tried to make her, about two strangers who chose each other, not because it was easy, but because it was right. And if anyone asked how peace really came to that place, someone would usually shrug and say, "It started the day he took a bullet for her," and neither of them ever stopped choosing life after that. Years passed gently after that, like a hand smoothing rough fabric. The rancher's hair silvered, first at the temples, then everywhere. His hand stayed strong, though slower, and she learned his quiet rhythms, the way he paused before standing, the way cold mornings settled into his joints. She brewed herbs he trusted more than doctors and wrapped his hands at night when the ache lingered. He never complained. When her steps faltered some days, old injuries waking without permission, he matched her pace without a word. They learned that love didn't announce itself in grand moments anymore. It lived in small adjustments, in patience, in staying. The town grew around them. New families arrived who didn't know the war except as a story. The children they once taught returned as adults with children of their own. Some called her auntie. Some called him old man, with affection that made his eyes soften. On one autumn afternoon, a boy asked him, "Is it true you were a hero?" He smiled, slow and honest. "No," he said, "I was scared. I just did what needed doing." The boy looked puzzled. She caught his eye and nodded. "That's what heroes say," she told him. They buried the dog beneath the old oak when its time came. He carved a marker by hand. She planted wildflowers that returned every spring, stubborn and bright. One winter was harder than the rest. Snow piled high. His breathing grew shallow. She slept sitting up in a chair beside the bed, listening to each rise and fall like it was a promise being renewed. One night he reached for her hand in the dark. "If I go first," he whispered, "don't let this place become quiet." She pressed her forehead to his. "I won't," she said. "I'll fill it with life." He smiled, eyes closed. "Good." He stayed. Spring came again, as it always did, almost stubborn in its faith. They sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the land wake up. Birds returned. Calves stumbled into the world on unsteady legs. "I never thought I'd get this," he said softly. "This?" she asked. "Peace," he replied. "Not the quiet kind, the shared kind." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Neither did I." When the end finally came, years later, gentle and unafraid, it found them holding hands. The town gathered afterward, filling the house just as he'd asked. Laughter mixed with tears, stories were told, food was shared. She stood before them, steady despite the ache. "He taught me that choosing kindness doesn't end when the danger does," she said. "It becomes the work of living." She stayed on the ranch, kept the fence crooked, let the garden grow wild, took in those who needed a place to rest, if only for a night. And sometimes, when the sun dipped low and the wind moved through the grass just right, it felt like he was still there, watching, approving, grateful. They had been strangers on opposite sides of a war. But what they built together outlasted every line that once tried to divide them. And that, more than anything, became the story the land remembered.